You're listening to Angel Nears, the podcast. Angel Nears is a Silicon Valley community for startup builders where founders and operators share their firsthand knowledge on building and scaling startups. I'm your host, Oleg Kujikov, and our guest today is Yuri Kolesnikov, an expert in building robust and scalable architectures from scratch for startups and growing companies. Most recently, he was the head of IT at Skydio, the leading U.S. drone manufacturer and world leader in autonomous flight. Today, we're diving into the growing issue of technical debt, a challenge that spans the tech industry from startups to established players, exploring its causes, consequences, and strategies for managing, mitigating, and preventing it. But before we get into the good stuff, Yuri, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Excited to have you. Before we get started with the real stuff, what does a technical debt dumpster fire look like in practice? Can we start with a small technical debt? What does a small technical debt dumpster fire look like?
My background is basically IT management, so I will talk about IT from this perspective. And the technical debt dumpster fire in IT is when years of quick fixes that you do, shared admin accounts, loosely controlled access, SaaS sprawl, missing documentation, neglected backups, it all collides at scale, and it leaves you with a fragile system, constant outages, and no clear path to recovery.
So can you share a story? Let's start there. You have IT tech experience. Is this something that you had to deal with at your own companies, or is this something that you kind of got hired and brought on to fix? Can you share some stories about out-of-control tech debt?
I will talk about both. Here's first example. I was working at a company that built a system that was critical for this company. The system was built around a specific GPU model, and it was running on a popular Linux distribution. So everything worked great, but the time goes on and Linux distribution releases a new version, and the older one is losing support. Okay, but here is where the dumpster fire starts. The GPU that was used was no longer in production. And the new version of GPU, identical in specs, but it wasn't compatible with an old OS. And the code base of the product was complex enough to make upgrade to the new version anything but trivial. So now we're stuck. You can't upgrade OS until your application is ready for that upgrade. But you cannot run the application on the newer hardware because you cannot get the old hardware anymore. And you are in a corner with no easy path forward. Here's where the fire starts. And that's what IT technical debt looks like. You have frozen system, obsolete hardware, and your developers should plan a rewrite a couple years ago. So in that case, I ended up just stockpiling old GPUs from every source I could find. Pretty much went to eBay and bought every GPU that was the right model. So that sustained us for about a year that it took us to upgrade to the new OS and keep going with the new hardware. So here's another example. It was from earlier in my career, and that's something that I inherited from the previous owners of the system. I joined the company that handled massive amounts of object storage. When they were a startup, they started with Amazon S3, but they realized that the cost is unsustainable. It was 10 years ago. Back then, Amazon was basically the only game in town, so it was expensive. And they made a smart move. They built their own on-prem S3 storage, and they deployed it across multiple data centers. It cut costs dramatically, and for a while, for a few years, everything was great. But at the time I joined the company, the debt crept in. The problem was that no one planned for what to do when the hardware reaches the end of life. And by the time we realized the problem, we were sitting in about 10 petabytes of data and no straightforward way to migrate it. At least not without shutting down the service. Fortunately, again, the market had evolved and there were cheaper cloud alternatives to Amazon S3, and we made the decision to move everything off the on-prem and back into the cloud. But it still took us about 8 months to architect and implement the migration. And during that time, obviously, some other development had to be delayed because a lot of effort went into this migration project. So that's another phase of a technical debt. What starts as a smart cost-saving move becomes a time bomb when there is no life cycle plan. And when it explodes, it doesn't just cost money, it costs momentum.
Yeah. It sounds like it really impacts these companies. My question is supposed to be like, were there any warning signs, or did it kind of explode without warning? And it sounds like in both these cases, the problem was spiraling out of control, but there weren't many warning signs, right? The GPUs were supposed to be compatible, or the decision to save early on comes back to bite you when you're not on a scalable memory storage system. So would you say there were warning signs? Were these kind of avoidable dumpster fires, or is this just something that's unavoidable?
Hard to say. There were no warning signs. I mean, okay, your old hardware is running, or in case of S3 storage, we had 5 data centers, the storage is running.
Yeah.
So there were no signs, except that you have to know that hardware manufacturers replace their hardware, and sometimes they don't worry about backwards compatibility. You have to know that the storage system come to the end of life. In about 5 to 6 years, you just have to replace them. They become old. As simple as you're running on 1 terabyte disks and you cannot buy them anymore because everybody's running on 10 terabyte disks. So there were no signs, there were no flashing lights that, okay, you have outages. In both cases, we didn't have outages or anything. It was just, we realized that there is no path forward. At some time, we'll just have to either stop development or shut down our service.
Right. It's like all of a sudden you realize you have this problem that's going to take you years to solve, or a very long timeline, and you didn't have a long timeline to prepare.
Yes, we were smart enough to realize that there will be a problem, but unfortunately, in the past, we were not smart enough to get ready.
So why do you think this happens to so many startups? I'm sure everyone knows this that's getting into startups. Technical debt is a huge risk for every startup, the boogeyman for so many of these companies. So many startups fail. Why do you think it's still underestimated as a concern?
Well, few reasons. First of all, obviously, startups are, by definition, in a survival mode. They have to get a product to market fast, and it's really important, and building a long-term infrastructure is not the highest priority. The usual mindset is we will deal with it when we get funding. Second reason is IT is seen as a cost center. I mean, demos, MVPs, investor pitches, it's all visible. IT is invisible until it breaks or slows things down. One more reason, no IT leadership at the beginning. Because when you start the company, early hires are usually engineers. They know things to do about IT. They set up their own network. They know how to deal with it. But they are not IT professionals, and there is no one who will be talking about access controls, backup strategy, vendor risk assessments until a breach or outage occurs. Something new that came up recently is that a lot of people assume that cloud will solve everything automatically. I've heard it many times. AWS scales automatically, so we don't need to plan. Well, without the guardrails, yes, you can scale pretty much indefinitely in AWS, assuming you have indefinite money. Cloud usage may become expensive. And actually, as I talked about my previous example when they used S3 storage, worked great and scaled great, except that it killed all the profit. The company was profitable, and all of a sudden it wasn't anymore. And obviously, in startups, there is no time or no budget for this boring work. It's not sexy. Disaster recovery, network segmentation, asset management. They don't get people excited, and they don't get investors excited. So everything is getting postponed, ignored, all kind of like duct tape together.
Oh, man. I think I'm going to have to postpone this conversation because I want to go back to root causes. So sort of like the engineers postponing the issue of tech debt. Let's postpone the solutions and let's just talk a little bit more about the problem before we get there. So What, in your experience, is the most common spark that starts one of these tech debt dumpster fires? Would you say it's the speed, the lack of processes, like in a startup, or poor architecture? What would you say would be the cause?
I would name two. One very common spark is just a lack of experience, especially when it comes to like foundational concepts like security. I'll give you an example. Firsthand, at a startup, the development team built their own authentication system. And they stored user passwords using plain MD5 hashes with no salt. If you're familiar with encryption, you know what it is. If you're not, it's just bad. Because no one on the team really understood what a salt was and why it mattered. So everything worked fine. But behind the scenes, it was a bomb. So we discovered this issue by accident. We were investigating completely different security problem. And that's when we realized that user passwords were stored in like unsalted MD5 hash. And if some attacker had gotten access to the user database before we got it, it could have been a disaster because the rainbow table attack would probably take a few hours to crack about 40 or 50,000 passwords that we had at this time. So that's how it starts. It's not a bad intention, it's just a gap in knowledge. Like, it's a working system until it becomes a security incident. So, an experience, it's not a crime. It's just, you need to bring the people who've seen the edge cases. Otherwise, you will learn the hard way.
Well, it's like that saying, failure to know the law doesn't give you a right to break the law.
Exactly. And we were lucky. We discovered this thing. But how many times you heard about passwords stolen and decrypted quickly across much larger companies, not the startups, actually.
Yeah.
But that's one. Here's another common spark for the dumpster fire. It's just the mindset of just get it working. Because you need to ship the product, you need to impress investors, you need to prove tractions. No one want to even know about ticketing systems or identity management or asset tracking. Instead, you go to AWS, you spin it up with your personal account, everything runs on their root account. VPN credentials, we'll just send them in Slack or over email. The laptops, okay, we'll get whatever we can and just ship it to developers. And they're not bad, they're not evil decisions. It's a survival mode. It's survival. But what you leave behind is landmines. In the future, there will be no audit trails, no way to scale support, and no foundation for security or compliance. The spark is really an assumption that IT can wait. The infrastructure, access control, device management, that's something that you can bolt on later. And by the time later arrives, you cannot actually build a structure. You have to tear it down a mess first and rebuild from scratch. And often it's in the middle of growth or under pressure from auditors. So that's my two reasons for the dumpster fire.
Yeah. What about some other factors that might play into this, leaving a bunch of tech debt? How do team sizes and levels of experience? So we've actually talked about levels of experience play into building up dangerous levels of tech debt. So maybe we can focus more on how does team size play into building up too much tech debt?
Again, team size in a startup is usually small. Especially in IT, that is an afterthought. Your IT team initially may be like half a person because the person is doing something else. And other areas, in your development and your DevOps, it's just a bunch of engineers that are doing everything. They're wearing multiple hats and founders doing the same thing. So the team is small. The problem is that when the team is small and inexperienced, the pressure to move fast can lead to real trouble. Like, for example, the password problem, just because nobody worked with secure password storage before. Inexperienced team built something that was really dangerous. Now, if you get an experienced team, and maybe not the entire team, you just need an experienced team leader, you can still move quickly. You can still cut corners, but you do it with guardrails.
Yeah.
So you leave some breadcrumbs when to say, okay, This will happen. We need cleanup later. This, in the future, will require us to pause and finish it. So, okay, you pause and pay down your debt before it slows everything down. So they can avoid the perfection. They have to be intentional with shortcuts, and they have to have a plan. So experience, in my opinion, is more important than a team size, at least in the leadership.
That's really interesting. So let's move on to now. We've identified that we might be in a technical debt crisis, and we're more onto solving it, and we're trying to manage some of this chaos. So, say I'm a founder. What's the first thing I should do when I realize that I'm in the middle of a technical debt crisis?
So the first thing, as I say, in a crisis, any crisis, step back and get visibility. Understand what's going on. Don't just jump into fixes. You have to start by mapping up your mess. So you need to realize what's really fragile, what is business critical, or what is just annoying but is still safe. Get someone who can audit the stacks, the infrastructure, the access, the dependencies, so you know where the landmines are. The fresh eyes are always better. Somebody who can map your structure and give some advice. And then prioritize. Fix the fire first. Don't try to fix everything at once. Fix what's really business critical and go with your plan. And important, talk to your team. Sometimes people pretend that there is no fire, everything's great. Your team knows things are breaking. And they need clarity, they need the direction, and they need a plan. So you own the problem and use this problem as a reset. It's not a blame game. That's about it.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about technical debt. These things tend to maybe not come out of nowhere, but oftentimes they are very involved fixes, right? And they're not quick fixes. They're caused by a bunch of these quick fixes, but they're going to take a long time to fix. And maybe you have lots of priorities. Obviously, you're a startup. You have lots of priorities. You've got a product roadmap to keep working on. So as you realize you have to prioritize solving this technical debt, you also have to balance keeping your product roadmap on track. How do you approach that kind of prioritization of fixing what exists and building the product that's going to take your startup to the next level?
As I said, in a startup, you probably will not be avoiding tech debt, so don't treat it as a separate thing. Just bake it into your development process. So let's say every sprint, every cycle, you should include some time for infrastructure cleanup, some refactoring, or automation alongside of new features. So just plan your technical debt payoff into your development process. So it's like you're renovating a house while you're still living in it. You cannot keep patching walls forever. You have to come up with a plan. Okay, today I fix the bathroom. Or in 6 months, we'll take a week and we'll fix the living room. I just moved, so I know how it works. And if you want to ship fast without breaking everything, your roadmap has to include stability as a deliverable, not as an afterthought.
Got it. So yeah, you have to have that plan in place, like your answer of what to do when you're in the tech debt crisis. You need to analyze the situation, figure out like what needs to be fixed, and then you approach all of the work together. If
you understand that you are collecting technical debt and if you're documenting it, then you can include it into your development process. Just every sprint, there is something that we fix. This is something that we left for later and we'll fix in this sprint. Things like this.
Have you ever had a technical debt problem that was so bad that you had to focus 100% on that issue? Has it ever been so bad that you have to pause product development entirely?
Well, honestly, no. I never had a chance to work for a company where we could just pause the product development or stop serving customers to clean up tech debt. Maybe it would be great, but no. It was not an option. Maybe in some companies it is. But for me, it was always like this old joke about a car mechanic who says that to a heart surgeon that our jobs are basically the same. We both fix engines. And the hard surgeon says, yeah, sure, but try doing it in a car that is going 70 miles an hour on the highway. And I think for startups and for the tech in general, that's what it is like. You don't get to stop. You don't have a chance to stop. So you always had to build plans that let you fix problems while keeping the business moving without pulling the plug.
Okay, so we've established that technical debt is, one, hard to avoid. Two, it's kind of hard to manage because you can't stop what you're doing to go and try to fix it. What are some practical ways to prevent technical debt or mitigate it from the beginning to where it doesn't get to this unmanageable place in the first place?
Well, again, it's a mindset. You have to accept that managing tech debt isn't optional. It's critical to your company's long-term success. In terms of IT, it means that you have to invest in IT early, even when it feels like, it's a cost center at this time. The payoff will show later in your uptime, in agility, and at the end, in dollars on the balance sheet. From there, again, if I'm talking about IT, I'm talking about what my experience is. Set up basic IT governance early. When you're a startup, you don't need a full-time team at first, and most likely you cannot afford it. But you do need experienced professionals. Bring in some fractional on contract, people who've seen how things go off rails and know how to keep them on track. It's a lot cheaper to design things right than to rebuild under pressure. And people like me, we really enjoy this kind of work. I like joining a startup on a temporary basis just to help them to set up some guardrails, set up some basic IT practice, and let them go and maybe meet in a year and see how it goes. And the early wins are real. You will consolidate accounts, you will lock down access, you will eliminate shadow IT, you will get the visibility into infrastructure. All of that will pay off later, and it will pay off fast. As soon as you have your first audit, you will realize that, okay, it worked.
Yeah. So it sounds like a smart investment. When do you think startups should start bringing in maybe a dedicated IT person? You mentioned like when a startup starts, you might have half an IT person. That's probably someone that's doing some other things. So when's the right time to have a strict... Yeah. From
my experience, it's usually when you go beyond the MVP. Especially it involves infrastructure. Obviously, if you're a startup that's building some phone app, you may never need a serious IT infrastructure. But if you build something that runs in the cloud or runs on premises and serves some big customers and corporation, once you proved, okay, your MVP works, once you went from a seed round to round A, it's time to talk about what you're building. I think if you plan to build it, for example, on Amazon, as soon as you went to Amazon, and as soon as you entered your root account credentials, and you plan to bring up like 10 or 20 instances, maybe you have to invite somebody who worked with it before, who will stop you from doing this and put together a guardrail. Amazon is actually pretty good at doing this, and if you do it from start, it's not even cost you a lot.
How about team culture? How do you build team culture that respects technical debt without getting too scared or paralyzed by it?
Again, you have to make the tech debt visible, and you have to tie it up to a real business impact. Tech debt is not a dirty secret. It's part of building fast. So if you track it, if you talk about it in sprint reviews, and if you treat it like any other work, people will start to take it seriously. And the leadership have to set the tone. If founders respect the work that reduces fragility, not just flashy features, teams will follow. So respecting tech debt doesn't mean avoiding it. It means managing it before it manages you.
How about good tech debt? Is that something that exists, or is that a myth we tell ourselves to make sleeping at night a little easier?
Oh no, it's It's not a myth. Tech debt can be good if it is intentional. So strategic tech debt can be a smart move when it helps you to hit a milestone or test an idea. And the key is to have a plan to clean it up later. So here's again, in my own experience as IT manager, very often when I am the first and only IT person in a growing company, and I have to build an infrastructure. For example, if it's on-prem infrastructure, I have to use whatever was available. So I'm buying old outdated hardware on eBay or other auctions. The hardware doesn't have manufacturer support. I have to hunt down spare parts on eBay. For a while, I don't get access to support and firmware releases. But for a while, that approach saves money. And it helps startup to move. And in my opinion, it's a good debt, but it has an expiration date. Because eventually, when the company grows, it becomes a real business, it has real customers, and you need to achieve some certifications, like SOC 2, ISO. You need to get supported infrastructure that can scale. Well, it's time for you to start buying the hardware with support, new one that you can update and support and replace parts. Yes, this is kind of tech debt that works if you're disciplined enough about paying it off. It's a temporary bridge. You build it fast, you use it carefully, and you replace it before it collapses.
Seems like a dangerous game.
It is, but you've seen temporary bridges, right? People use it all the time. It's just a tool.
That's really interesting. It seems like there's a lot of nuance to this game. Obviously, experience is really important when you're making these decisions of how long I'm going to keep this technical debt. It's hard to even talk about, but you know what I'm trying to say. When you're going to pay off the technical debt, or what is a good tech debt investment to take. It's all very nuanced. So what have you learned? What kind of processes have you found that are helpful for keeping your tech debt under control?
So you don't need any fancy tools. So tech debt under control is all about visibility, accountability, and the discipline. So you just start simple. You track your debt like you track your features. Take your project board, Jira, Notion, whatever you like to use, and label all the shortcuts you made, all the security gaps that you know you have, or any hacks that will need a cleanup later. And keep a rhythm. Dedicate part of each sprint or part of your roadmap cycle to debt pay down. So treat it like product work, because it is. And if you're not sure where to start, well, bring someone who's been through it. Experienced IT advisor can help you surface the risks that you don't see.
Does it ever get out of control? Tech debt, it's kind of one of these things that can balloon, right? And is it ever so bad, you think, that you're better off just starting a new product or something?
Well, I never been in a situation like this when it completely spiraled out of control. I've been in a situation where tech debt start collecting again fragile storage systems that we had, which led to the very important customer-facing service. The availability was dropping beyond 99%. And I'm not talking about 5 nines that people like to say. No, I'm talking 99.0, and it will start going to 98. And it's a terrible number if you talk about if you convert it into downtime every month. And yeah, we managed to fix it. I never had experience where tech debt led to a real crash, but I'm sure some other people did.
I just thought I'd ask. That's an interesting answer. So what about non-technical stakeholders? I think it wouldn't be too hard to convince anyone technical that has especially that's had experience fixing technical debt, that it's worth it to dedicate some resources per sprint, per cycle to fixing technical debt. But what about everyone else? How do you convince people that aren't as technical that these are real issues that are going to lead to long-term consequences, that it's worth the time and the money to fixing them now when they don't always point at identifiable business outcomes?
Yeah. Well, you frame it in business terms. Don't talk to them about code, automation. Talk about impact. So going back to my example with availability dropping below 99%, it was a photo hosting storage that I had to run IT operations. Don't talk to your business people. Don't tell them that our availability is 99. No, tell them we had a 6-hour downtime yesterday. For 6 hours, people couldn't reach their website. Yeah. So, and this is an issue that erodes our business because the 6 hours they cannot access their website, they spend the 6 hours looking for the competition.
Yeah.
So, yes. So you don't say them, oh, we need to buy new servers. You don't tell them we need to refactor code. No. What I say, we're losing trust and it's costing us customers. And that's when non-technical people start paying attention.
Yeah, you speak to them on their terms.
Exactly. And sometimes you have to make it easy. As I said, for some people think that 99% availability is not that bad. It's almost 100%. But literally over a month, it translates into a few hours of downtime. And that's bad, especially if it's you and you're trying to access something.
Okay, what about documenting your technical debt? You said you don't really need any fancy tools to really keep tech debt under control, but there are tools out there. Maybe Jira is one of them, and I'm sure there's many more. You mentioned Notion, but how do you like to track your tech debt?
Documentation is everything, especially if it's a conscious tech debt. If you do it and you know about this, you have to document it. And you have to manage it. Because it's not really a problem if it's tracked and managed. It's really dangerous when it's invisible. If you cut a corner in building some system, and let's say you switched a role within the company or you left, somebody else comes in and they don't have it documented, this tech debt became invisible just because you didn't document it. So documentation is everything.
Do you have any tips and tricks on documentation? I'm just curious because there's so many approaches to take, right? So many different tools to use. Do you have any best practices or advice when it comes to documenting a code base or anything?
Well, every company does it different, but there are some tools. I like to use Confluence because it's really easy. It's not that expensive. It's really easy to share documents and manage. I was against doing these things, for example, in the Google Docs, because Google Docs quickly becomes like a collection of documents that is impossible to search. And sometimes people forget to use it as shared doc. Somebody leaves, documents disappear. So use tool like Confluence or any kind of wiki-based tool is a good example. It's good for collaboration. It's good for keeping the documentation. And even if somebody leaves, it stays behind.
So don't make it too complicated.
No. I mean, you don't have time. Never make it too complicated. But when you're a startup, you don't have time and money to make it complicated.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. Okay, so last question here. If a founder is listening to this right now and they are staring at their own burning code base, I think you've already given them good advice. But on this podcast, what's your advice to them? What should they do today, right now?
Well, if you realize that something is burning, don't panic and don't point fingers. Acknowledge that you have a mess. Own this mess and move forward. Get together a team. You may need just engineers, you may need IT, you may need product, you may need to get salespeople involved to understand what's going on and get a full picture of what's broken and what is just messy and annoying. And then build a plan. So focus on the critical stability issues and customer impact. And whatever you do, communicate. Talk to a team. Talk to stakeholders. Let them know what's happening, what's being fixed, and why. Because transparency keeps trust alive even when the system is on fire. Going back to my example with like end of life on-prem storage system. Remember I talk about like moving from the cloud to on-prem and back to the cloud. When we realize that we have the system that comes to the end of life, we don't have a real clear plan of like replacing it or doing something. We just have no idea what to do. Well, panic is not an option. We have a service to run. So we got the people in the room. We got the development team. We got everybody else. We had to assess like how much time do we really need to fix this without stopping our service. We had to decide what product work could be delayed, because I had to pull some engineers to work on the migration plan and some important engineers. So obviously a few things were delayed and we focused on this migration. And it will work if you have a clarity, if you have alignment, and if you're willing to act fast without like going into a spiral.
Well, thank you for sharing, Yuri. How can the listeners, if you'd like the listeners to reach you, how can they reach you? Or if you'd just like to leave them with maybe something to check out, what would you like the listeners to do?
Well, if you want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn, Yuri Kolesnikov. Yeah, I'm reading my incoming messages. Yes, I'm always willing to help if you need.
All right, excellent. Yeah, I didn't want to volunteer your time if you were busy doing other things, but if you got a burning technical debt problem, Yuri's there on LinkedIn to maybe help for the right price.
As I said, I love this kind of work, so really.
All right. Well, we're going to end the show there. Yuri, thank you again for joining. If you liked our show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. To learn more about Angelneers, visit angelneers.com. Thank you to our chief engineer for producing this episode and editing. And again, Yuri, thank you for joining us today, and best of luck on whatever you're working on next.